I heard my wife confess to her friend in a phone call that she cheated on me with her boss. It wasn't a mistake, it wasn't an assumption, it wasn't one of those paranoias that sometimes arise in the mind of a man who loves too much and fears losing. No. I heard every word, every shaky breath, every pause filled with guilt and excitement. As if it were a secret too precious to keep to herself, she handed it to another woman, amidst whispers and muffled laughter. My chest closed. My muscles seized up. The betrayal was already unbearable, but the way she talked about it, as if it were an accomplishment, as if she had enjoyed it, as if she didn't have the slightest worry about me, that was the real fatal blow. I closed my eyes, hoping that when I opened them, everything would have been a delirium, a bad dream from which I would wake up sweaty, panting, but relieved. But her voice still filled the room, each syllable a sharp blade ripping through the flesh of my pride. It was amazing, she said. He knows exactly how to touch me. Different, you know. Not like, you know. The silence that followed was more deafening than any explosion. And how do you feel about that? Asked the friend, hesitantly. My wife hesitated for a second. I don't feel bad. Just, live. You know, right? He makes me feel wanted. A low, complicit laugh. My stomach turned. The betrayal was already something too heavy to carry, but hearing his satisfaction, his pleasure in reporting the act, turned everything into something dirty, filthy. I wanted to stop listening, I wanted to turn off my hearing, I wanted to disappear from existence itself. But I was there, paralyzed, every second of the conversation burning itself into my mind like a red-hot iron. She spoke of his touch, the way he pulled her against the office table, how intense, forbidden, electrifying every moment was. I felt like I could explode at any moment. Like I was discovering a side of myself that I didn't even know existed, she said, in a tone that matched not the love of a wife, but the excitement of a woman who doesn't want to stop. Was it the first time? The friend asked, curious. No, my wife replied. It wasn't the first, and it certainly won't be the last. My heart hammered against my chest, my hands tingled. So many images came to mind, so many memories that were once happy now were tainted, poisoned by confession. I could see her leaving for work every day, smiling, kissing me as if nothing had happened, as if everything was normal. I could see her coming back late, saying she was exhausted, that she had a long meeting, that she just wanted to take a shower and sleep. How many of those nights were spent in another man's arms? How many moments did I believe being next to a faithful wife were just an illusion? I closed my fists. My first reaction was one of hatred, of fury, of an irrational need to confront her at that very second, to burst open the door and scream, to demand explanations that I knew would never be enough. But something stopped me. A primal instinct. It wasn't the time. Not yet. I wanted to know more. I wanted to understand how far this betrayal went, I wanted to see how far it was willing to sink, to dirty everything we had built together. And it was then that fate, cruel and unpredictable, decided to act. The next day, while I was trying to breathe, trying to pretend that there was still something normal in my life, an unexpected event reversed everything. A woman, unknown to me, appeared in the parking lot of my wife's work, holding her cell phone in her hand, her eyes red, wet, destroyed. In a matter of minutes, the entire company found out. The whole truth was ripped from secrecy and thrown to the ground to be trampled on. That woman, the boss's wife, had discovered everything. And she wasn't willing to forgive. She didn't want it to die in the darkness of private conversations. She wanted to expose. She wanted to make it bleed. I didn't have to do anything. No revenge planned, no trap to catch them in the act. The betrayed woman did everything for me. She got evidence, audios, messages, photos. She disclosed everything, and from one day to the next, my wife went from a respected employee to a walking scandal. No one looked at her without whispering. No colleague passed by without a look of contempt. The boss? He was in despair, trying to save what was left of his reputation, but it was too late. The mask had fallen. The weight of humiliation began to devour them both. And it was at that moment that I realized, maybe life has a peculiar way of balancing things. Perhaps destiny has its own way of demanding what is taken from us. What was left now? What should I do? Should I forgive her, now that she was fallen, now that she felt the shame of being exposed? Or should I move on, let his punishment run its course, without getting involved, without looking back? The curious thing about all this is that there is still one detail that she doesn't know. A detail that, when she finds out, could make this story even more devastating. And that, I decided that she will only know when it is too late. Welcome to the channel. Here, we do not support and never romanticize betrayal. The stories you will hear are fictional, but they carry a brutal truth: betrayal destroys lives, ruins homes and leaves deep scars. Each narrative is a reminder that trust is a precious asset, and once it is broken, it will never be the same again. Get ready, because today's story is shocking, intense, and full of twists. Are you ready to face the bitter truth of betrayal? So let's get started. The clock on the bookshelf in the living room said it was almost 8 at night when Ethan parked the car in the garage at home. Fatigue weighed on his shoulders, but there was something that always invigorated him: the feeling of being back home, next to the woman he chose to share his life with. He turned off the engine, took a deep breath and rubbed his hands over his face, pushing away the remnants of an exhausting day at the office. In recent months, the workload had increased considerably, but he never complained. It was part of it. He worked hard to ensure a comfortable life, not only for himself, but mainly for Emma, his wife, and for the stability that they both built with so much effort. Their marriage was solid, at least that's what Ethan believed. They had been together for 7 years, and despite the natural ups and downs of any relationship, he couldn't imagine a scenario where they weren't side by side. Emma was always her best friend, her accomplice, someone with whom she shared not only happy moments, but also life's uncertainties and worries. From the day he met her, he knew he wanted to grow old with her. She had that lightness in her eyes, a spontaneous glow that made him forget everything around him. Time passed, challenges came, but his love for her remained unshakable. He entered the house and was greeted by the unmistakable aroma of vanilla incense that Emma always lit at dusk. The room was impeccably tidy, as always, and low music played in the background, creating an almost serene atmosphere. He felt welcomed, as he did every night when he returned. The routine might be monotonous for some, but for him, it was a comfort. He knew that not everything was like at the beginning of the relationship, when they couldn't keep their hands off each other and any reason was enough for an intense night of love. But I thought this was natural. Relationships mature, desire turns into complicity, and he saw no problem with that. Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway, wearing a thin sweater and sweatpants, holding a glass of wine. Her smile was delicate, and her eyes lit up slightly when she saw him. Ethan smiled back, walked over and left a light kiss on her forehead before sliding his hands around her waist. "Hi, love," he murmured, enjoying the familiar scent of her perfume for a second. Emma returned the gesture, but there was something subtly different about her. Maybe it was just an impression, but for a moment, he felt that the hug didn't have the same intensity as before. He didn't worry about that. It had been a long day, perhaps she was tired too. They had dinner together, as they always did, talking about each other's day. Emma talked about the office, mentioning the tasks and challenges of dealing with pressure. Ethan listened to her attentively, offering opinions whenever he felt necessary. I liked being present in her life, understanding her routine, her little frustrations, her achievements. I always wanted to be the kind of husband who was genuinely interested in what was going on in his wife's world. Her gaze, however, would occasionally shift away, as if her mind was somewhere else. But he always came back on time, smiling, conducting the conversation naturally. When they finished, Ethan picked up the dishes and took them to the sink, a habit he had maintained since the first few months of their marriage. "Let me take care of it," he said, as he started to wash. Emma laughed and shook her head. "You never get tired of being so prim, right?" he joked, taking another sip of wine. "Someone has to keep the balance," he replied, winking. It was this type of exchange that made everything so special between them. The love was there, even in the simplest gestures. After a quick shower, Ethan went to the bedroom and threw himself on the bed, waiting for Emma to lie down next to him. But she took a little longer than usual in the bathroom, and when she finally appeared, she already had her cell phone in her hand, typing something. He glanced at it, but didn't want to show curiosity. He wasn't the type to watch, never had been. "I trusted her. Always trusted." Emma got comfortable on the bed and, without putting down the phone, smiled softly. "I need to respond to a work message," he muttered, before turning to the side. Ethan nodded, closed his eyes and tried to relax. Minutes later, she felt the bed move subtly as she turned to the other side, picking up her cell phone again and typing carefully so that the notifications didn't make noise. That night was different from the others. For the first time in a long time, Ethan felt like something was off. It wasn't anything concrete, just an uncomfortable feeling that I couldn't explain. Sleep came, but it was not peaceful. The following days passed without any major changes. Emma continued to act the same way, attentive at times, distracted at others. Nothing glaring, nothing that sounded like an immediate alarm. Ethan followed his routine, without much questioning. Maybe it was just a complicated period, maybe it was tiredness. But one thing began to become a pattern: Emma left for work earlier and earlier, frequently returned late, and always seemed busy with something. What Ethan didn't know was that, while he was worried about keeping his marriage stable, about being a present, dedicated, attentive husband, something was unfolding behind the scenes. Something that, when it came to light, would completely transform his perception of the woman at his side. On that particular night, one phone call would change everything. The days followed the usual course, but something was different, even if imperceptible to the naked eye. Small details accumulated like loose pieces of a puzzle that still didn't make sense. Ethan understood, but he didn't want to see. The way Emma became more and more distracted, the smiles contained when looking at her cell phone, the messages typed carefully before quickly locking the screen. Sometimes she would leave her phone face down on the table, something she never did before. Small changes, insignificant if seen separately, but which, together, began to create an uncomfortable scenario. Ethan tried to ignore it, to rationalize it. Maybe it was the stress of work, maybe it was just a phase. He knew that marriages went through ups and downs, he knew that desire cooled, that routine set in, and he always believed that their foundation was strong enough to withstand any wear and tear. Emma was still sweet, but the sweetness seemed more mechanical, like a well-rehearsed script. His kisses were given at the right time, his words were measured with precision, and his gaze, at times, seemed to be somewhere else. Still, Ethan clung to the idea that everything was fine, because the alternative of questioning it was so much scarier. He preferred to believe in stability, he preferred to think that nothing was happening. But the truth has a cruel way of revealing itself when you least expect it. One Friday night, Emma mentioned that she was having dinner with her work colleagues. Ethan thought it was strange, since these meetings rarely happened on weekdays. But he didn't question it. He said she deserved a moment to relax, to enjoy it, and she just smiled, seeming relieved that he didn't insist on more details. He watched her leave, wearing a dress she hadn't worn in a while, the same one he always complimented her on when they went to events together. His eyes followed her movements as she adjusted her hair in the mirror, put on a last swipe of lipstick, and picked up her purse. Before leaving, Emma approached and kissed him, but it was a brief, hurried kiss, as if someone needed to resolve a detail quickly before leaving. Ethan stood there, motionless, watching the door close, feeling in discomfort he couldn't name. He tried to occupy his mind by watching television, but nothing held his attention. Every minute, his thoughts returned to Emma, to dinner, to the dress she chose. He took out his cell phone and opened the conversation with her. No messages. He didn't want to appear paranoid, so he locked the screen and took a deep breath. But something inside him throbbed, insisting he shouldn't ignore it. It was only after midnight that Emma returned. He was still awake, waiting, feigning disinterest. She entered the house without making a sound, taking off her shoes before crossing the room, as if she didn't want to attract attention. When she saw him sitting on the sofa, she stopped for a moment and smiled, but her look revealed surprise. "Still awake?" he asked, placing his bag on the table. Ethan shrugged, as if there was no reason to be surprised. "I wasn't sleepy," he replied. Emma nodded, ran her fingers through her hair and said that dinner was great, that it was good to be with her colleagues, to relax a little. He just listened, without interrupting. She entered the bathroom, and it was then that something caught her attention. Her bag was open on the table, and her cell phone was resting in one of the internal compartments, the screen slightly lit. Ethan wasn't the type to touch her things, he always respected her space, but this time, he couldn't ignore the impulse. He picked up his cell phone and saw that there was a recent message, not yet read. The name on the screen made the blood in his veins run cold. He was her boss. With trembling fingers, Ethan unlocked the screen. His heart beat faster as he read the message. "It was incredible tonight. I can't wait to do it again." A tightness took over his chest, his breathing became heavy. He glanced at the previous messages, unable to blink. "You looked beautiful at dinner. The night was perfect. It's always worth every risk." Risk. The weight of the word echoed in his mind. The air seemed to go out, and suddenly, everything made sense. The dress. The hesitation. The distant look. The hurried touch of lips. Emma wasn't at a dinner with colleagues. Emma was with another man. His entire body was overcome by a daze, a mixture of disbelief and anger. He read and reread the messages, hoping, perhaps, to find a justification that would alleviate that. But there wasn't. It was real. The woman he loved, who he always put on a pedestal, was cheating on him. And not with just anyone. With the boss himself. The sound of the shower turning off brought Ethan back to reality. He placed his cell phone in the same place, took a step back and passed his hand over his face, trying to control the turmoil that was taking place inside him. The bathroom door opened, and Emma came out, her hair still damp and a robe wrapped around her body. "I'm going to lie down," she said, without noticing the change in his expression. Ethan just nodded, saying nothing. She walked past him, walked to the bedroom and turned off the lights. Ethan stood there in the middle of the room, feeling his world fall apart. "I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to react. The only thing I was sure of was that nothing would ever be the same." Ethan spent the weekend immersed in a cold, distant silence, watching Emma as if seeing her for the first time. Her every movement now seemed like a farce, every smile a well-practiced lie. The touch of his hand no longer had any warmth, the sound of his voice sounded distant, like an echo from a past that no longer existed. But he didn't confront it. Not yet. He wanted more. He needed to see how far she would go with her charade, how far she would have the courage to keep up appearances. And she, oblivious to what was about to happen, continued her routine, without imagining that the trap had already been set. On Monday, Ethan left for work but didn't go to the office. He stayed in the car, parked on a nearby street, watching Emma leave. She wore an elegant, impeccable outfit and walked around in a hurry, checking her cell phone all the time. Her look wasn't that of a wife who just went to work. There was expectation, anxiety. And he knew in that instant that she wasn't just going for an ordinary day at the office. He started the car and followed her, keeping enough distance so as not to arouse suspicion. At each traffic light, at each curve, I felt my chest tighten more, as if I knew that, at the end of that journey, I would encounter something that would destroy the last shred of hope that remained. She stopped at a discreet hotel, one of those that don't attract attention, that exist precisely for meetings that need to be hidden. He got out of the car and looked around, as if to make sure no one was watching. Ethan lowered himself slightly in his seat, his eyes fixed on her, his hands shaking on the steering wheel. Then, as if time slowed down, he saw the exact moment the man appeared. The boss. The bastard who was sleeping with his wife. He approached Emma with a smile that she returned without hesitation, a smile that Ethan hadn't seen in a long time. They exchanged a few words, then entered the hotel. Ethan lay still for a long time, trying to absorb what he had just witnessed. My heart was beating so hard it hurt. The air seemed to be lacking, as if something was crushing his chest from the inside. He already knew about the betrayal, but seeing it with his own eyes was different. There were no more assumptions, no more room for excuses or doubts. It was real. Emma was a fake. And he's an idiot. He could have walked away, he could have kept it and thought of a way to deal with it later. But something inside him burned, an impulse he couldn't contain. He got out of the car and entered the hotel, feeling his blood boiling in his veins. The receptionist looked at him, but didn't have time to ask anything before he went straight to the elevators. He looked at the panel and saw that the top floor was in use. He pressed the button and waited, the seconds dragging by like hours. When the doors opened, he walked down the hallway with steady steps, stopping in front of the only door that made sense. The silence of the corridor contrasted with the chaos within it. Without hesitation, he knocked on the door. Strong. 3 times. The sound echoed through the hall. The silence on the other side was immediate. Then, hurried steps. Murmurs. And then the door opened just enough for Emma to appear, her eyes wide, her breathing ragged. The hotel's white robe barely covered her body, her disheveled hair betrayed what had happened minutes before. Ethan didn't need to say anything. The look in his eyes said it all. Emma opened her mouth, but no words came out. Then the boss appeared behind her, wearing only his suit pants, the buttons on his belt still undone. He saw Ethan and his face lost color. The silence was cut by Ethan's voice, low, firm, carrying something that made Emma shudder. Finish getting dressed. I think we have a lot to talk about. The room seemed too small for the 3 of them. Emma tried to adjust her robe, her hands were shaking. The boss, on the other hand, tried to regain his bearings, as if he still had some control over the situation. But Ethan was no longer a man to be intimidated. He looked at them both with contempt, then turned to Emma. How long has it been? The question hung in the air like a weight that was impossible to ignore. Emma looked away, trying to find words to soften that. But there were no words. I can explain, she began, her voice breaking. Ethan laughed, a dry, humorless laugh. Can you? Because from what I see, you've already explained a lot to him. His gaze cut through the boss like a blade. Was that why the schedule started changing? Was that why I slept alone so many nights? Were you here, with him? Emma brought her hands to her face, tears welling in her eyes. It's not like that, Ethan. Isn't that so? He took a step forward, forcing her to face him. So what's it like? Explain to me, Emma. Explain how this is different from what it seems. The boss cleared his throat, trying to assume a superior posture. I guess there's no need for so much drama, Ethan. These things happen, you know how it is. Ethan slowly turned to him, and for the first time, the man saw something in his gaze that made him take a step back. Do these things happen? His voice was a dangerous whisper. You sleep with my wife and tell me that these things happen. The boss hesitated, but maintained his pose. It was her choice too. Ethan took a deep breath, forcing himself not to lose control. He turned to Emma, who was crying silently. You destroyed everything. Not just our marriage, but me. I trusted you, Emma. She sobbed. Ethan, please let me explain. I did everything wrong, but... He raised his hand, stopping her. It doesn't matter anymore. I just needed to be sure. He started to walk away, but before leaving, he looked at the two of them once again. Take advantage of this moment. Because it won't last long. And he left, without looking back. But the worst was yet to come. When Ethan went down to the lobby, his phone vibrated in his pocket. A message from an unknown number. He opened it and felt his stomach drop. It was a photo. A photo of Emma and her boss together at a company event, in a far corner, their faces too close together. But the most shocking thing was not the image. It was the caption sent along. You weren't the only one fooled. Now everyone will know. Ethan stood in the middle of the hotel lobby, holding his cell phone, eyes fixed on the message. The blood was still pounding in his ears, the anger boiling in his chest, but now a new element entered the equation. Someone knew. Someone saw it. Someone was ready to expose everything. Whoever it was didn't just want to reveal the betrayal to him, they wanted to turn it into a public scandal. He looked up, scanning the space around him, as if expecting to see some mysterious figure watching him, but the lobby was busy, full of guests coming and going, oblivious to what had just happened. He took a deep breath, clutching the cell phone between his fingers. The humiliation he had just felt still burned like fire beneath his skin, but now, there was something more, a harbinger of impending doom. If someone was really willing to expose everything, the situation was about to explode, and he had no control over what would come next. The initial impulse was to go back up to the room and throw everything in Emma and that bastard's face, but what was the point? The betrayal had already been done, the poison had already been spilled. Now, he wanted to see how everything would fall apart. He left the hotel without saying goodbye, without looking back. He walked to the car as if in a trance, his steps heavy, his mind spinning. The message was still open, the photo of them together, a previously unnoticed detail now catching the eye. Emma was smiling. It didn't look like the tense smile of someone about to make a mistake, but rather that of someone who felt comfortable, safe. That made his stomach churn again. How long had she been involved in this? He got into the car and started the engine, without a specific destination. Driving helped clear his thoughts, helped organize the chaos inside him. But this time, nothing seemed capable of bringing order. His entire life, until that morning, seemed distant, as if it belonged to someone else. The home they built, the promises exchanged, the years of complicity, all of this now seemed like just a set for a theater of lies. His cell phone vibrated again. He hesitated before looking. Another message. Tomorrow at 10 a.m. Board meeting. You'll want to be there. Board meeting. Ethan wasn't part of that circle, but he knew Emma's boss was. A foreboding formed in his chest, and for the first time that night, a glimmer of expectation appeared amid the storm. Whoever was behind those messages wanted more than just to tell him the truth. I wanted to destroy. The next day, Ethan dressed meticulously, as if he was preparing for battle. She looked in the mirror before leaving and saw something different in her own eyes, a coldness that had never been there before. I was ready to watch the house fall apart. When he arrived at Emma's company, he felt the tension in the air. Employees whispered among themselves, discreet glances averted as he passed by. He wasn't part of that world, but that day, everyone seemed to know exactly who he was. This only confirmed that something big was about to happen. He entered the meeting room uninvited, feeling the eyes turning to him. In the center of the table, Emma's boss sat, his expression tense, his fingers drumming on the polished wood. Emma stood beside him, pale, eyes wide as she saw him enter. Silence hung in the air for a few moments before the door opened again. And then, she entered. The boss's wife. Dressed in an impeccable suit, her eyes sparkling with something that wasn't just anger, but determination. She held an envelope in her hands and walked to the head of the table as if she owned the place. He looked around and smiled, but it was a smile without humor, without kindness. "Good morning," he said, his voice firm, without hesitation. "I believe everyone here knows why we are gathered." The boss clearing his throat, trying to compose himself. "Honey, that's not necessary. We can work this out privately." She let out a short, sharp laugh. "Private? Ah, now you want discretion. Interesting, considering it was exactly the lack of discretion that got you into this situation." Emma looked from one to the other, her hands shaking in her lap. Ethan remained standing, arms crossed, feeling a cold satisfaction rising within him. The boss's wife opened the envelope and threw a series of printed photos onto the table. "Here is your precious boss, our great leader, enjoying his time out of the office. And here," he picked up another photo and turned it toward Emma, "is your dedicated employee. Very dedicated, I must say." The room was completely silent. The boss turned pale, Emma covered her mouth with her hand. Ethan watched everything, without needing to say a single word. "This evidence was delivered directly to the company's board," the wife continued, "and coincidentally, our internal policy prohibits relationships between directors and subordinates, especially when they involve undue benefits." Emma's eyes widened. "Benefits? I didn't get anything." "Ah, but he received it," interrupted his wife. "And the company doesn't like bosses who compromise the integrity of the business." She turned to the others present. "The decision has already been made. Your contract will be terminated, and all this dirt will be dealt with in accordance with ethics clauses." The boss stood up, his fists clenched. "You're destroying me." She took a step forward, looking him in the eye. "No, honey. You destroyed yourself." The tension in the atmosphere was palpable. Emma looked like she couldn't breathe, her eyes glued to the envelope on the table. Ethan waited. I wanted to see how far she would go. Then, finally, she looked at him. "Ethan." He raised his hand, interrupting any attempt at explanation. "No need, Emma. I've heard enough." She stood up abruptly, her eyes teary. "I didn't know this would happen. I never wanted, but it happened," he cut in. "And now, everything you built with it is falling apart. Just like you destroyed what we had." The boss left the room in silence, defeated. His wife remained there for a moment, looking at Emma with a mixture of contempt and pity. Then he turned to Ethan. "If you need anything, I'm available." He nodded. Emma collapsed into the chair, the tears finally falling. But Ethan no longer felt anything. He turned and left, without looking back. This time, he was the one leaving Emma alone in the middle of the ruins. The following days were an emotional blur for Ethan, who tried futilely to reorganize his life amid the chaos left by the betrayal and revenge he had witnessed. Nothing seemed concrete or solid anymore, even the most basic routine, once comforting, now seemed foreign, empty of meaning. He started to avoid the apartment, leaving behind memories of a life built alongside the woman who, at that moment, seemed like a stranger. He chose to take refuge in a small hotel far away, a neutral place, where he could try to understand the turmoil within himself, although he knew that time would not erase what had happened. His mind constantly wavered between anger and deep sadness, a sense of loss that went beyond the betrayal itself. Perhaps the hardest blow was realizing that she had wasted so many years, so much emotional energy and dedication on someone who not only broke her trust, but who destroyed her ability to believe in love. He questioned himself tirelessly, reliving old moments, looking for clues that might have gone unnoticed before. He wondered if he had been too naive, if he should have seen the signs that now seemed too clear to ignore. And this guilt that fell on himself was almost worse than the pain caused by betrayal. Meanwhile, Emma was desperately trying to contact Ethan. The messages arrived in dozens, begging for forgiveness, asking to be listened to, trying to justify their actions with words that now sounded hollow and meaningless. Ethan couldn't even read them to the end, because every word she sent was a stab in a still open wound. His decision was clear and painful at the same time: there was no more room for her in his life. There was no excuse capable of repairing the damage that had been done. He blocked her number, deleted the messages, and tried, in vain, to rebuild his routine without the constant presence of that woman's ghost. The work was no longer the same either. Ethan wandered around the office distractedly, unable to concentrate on the simplest tasks. Colleagues realized that something serious had happened, but respected their privacy, limiting themselves to giving looks of concern and discreet curiosity. Ethan realized that he would need to talk to someone about all of this, as holding all that pain alone was becoming unbearable. On a particularly difficult afternoon, he finally accepted an invitation from a coworker, Maya, who had noticed his depressed state and suggested a coffee after work. He was hesitant at first, but decided that perhaps he needed to talk to someone outside of the situation, someone neutral who could listen without judging him. Maya listened carefully, with a reassuring calm. Her genuine empathy comforted Ethan, allowing him to finally get out the words that had been stuck in his throat for days. As he spoke, he noticed the momentary relief that came with releasing that emotional burden, although he knew that this was just the beginning of a long healing process. When he finished, Maya looked at him with a mix of affection and concern and told him something he hadn't considered until then: maybe you don't have to carry the weight of this decision alone. Maybe the question isn't just to forgive or not to forgive. Maybe it's about how you're going to live after this. What do you want to do with this pain? Keep it, or use it to change something inside you? These words resonated deeply with Ethan, bringing to light a crucial issue that he had yet to truly face. What would he do now? How would she move forward after her life had been completely upended? Could he ever regain trust in anyone again? Could you allow yourself to love or trust another person without the constant fear of being betrayed again? Ethan then realized that the biggest dilemma was not to forgive Emma or punish her with eternal contempt, but how to transform this destructive experience into something that could make him a better person, and not someone eternally bitter and suspicious. Meanwhile, at the company, the scandal spread quickly, reaching greater proportions than Ethan had imagined. Emma lost her job and her reputation was completely devastated, becoming a hot topic in every social circle she frequented. Ethan took no pleasure in this news, despite everything. He had dreamed so many times of seeing her suffer, but now that it actually happened, he felt nothing but a heavy emptiness, a bitter sensation of justice done but no real satisfaction. I couldn't celebrate her fall, because her fall also represented an important part of her life leaving permanently. Days later, when Ethan least expected it, Maya came looking for him again. She had news, unexpected news that would bring even more complexity to that already delicate situation. During an informal conversation with colleagues at Emma's old company, she had learned that the boss's wife had contacted Ethan not just out of personal revenge. She intended to sue her husband for financial fraud, a situation that directly involved Emma, even though she was not fully aware of the illegal activities in which she had been indirectly involved. Ethan was now faced with another complex moral dilemma: could he leave Emma alone to face the consequences of actions she didn't know she was taking part in, or should he intervene, warn her, and perhaps spare her from even more serious consequences than she had already faced? This new information affected him deeply, because, no matter how hurt and betrayed he was, there was a line between resentment and the desire for justice. Ethan needed to decide between acting on his wounded pride, allowing Emma to be completely destroyed in the crossfire of that dispute, or taking a step beyond the pain and reaching out to someone who had been the cause of his greatest hurt, but who, perhaps, did not deserve to pay for something he did not knowingly do. That night was longer than all the previous ones. Ethan couldn't sleep, consumed by this dilemma that involved justice, revenge and compassion. Deep down, he knew he couldn't just ignore everything, because if he did, he would be allowing his pain to turn him into someone he didn't want to be. However, facing Emma again, after everything, was almost unbearable. At dawn, tired and still in doubt, he finally picked up the phone, unblocked her number, typed a brief and direct message, with no room for feelings or resentment. We need to talk about something important. Not for me, but for you. It's serious. Her response came almost immediately, full of surprise and cautious hope. They scheduled the meeting in a neutral, public place, where they could talk without reliving unnecessary memories, but Ethan knew that that moment would define not only her destiny, but mainly his. His heart raced as he walked to the meeting point, knowing that, whatever decision was made there, their lives would never be the same again. Ethan took a deep breath and opened the door, knowing that this time, he would not just be a spectator, but the true protagonist of their destiny. Ethan arrived early at the cafe where he had arranged to meet Emma, choosing a discreet table at the back of the room. The place was peaceful, quiet enough to talk without interruptions, and empty enough to guarantee privacy, even though we were in public. He ordered a strong coffee, watching the slow movement of the street through the window as he waited. His thoughts were focused on how he would conduct this delicate conversation, without leaving room for old resentments, although he knew that completely ignoring the past would be impossible. When Emma entered, wearing simple, discreet clothes and with a visibly haggard expression, Ethan realized that the woman in front of him was no longer the one he had known for so many years. Emma seemed to have aged a decade in a few days, with eyes marked by sleepless nights and a face full of guilt, regret and shame. She approached the table with uncertain steps, sitting down slowly while looking away from his, too embarrassed to maintain that contact. Ethan felt a slight pang in his chest, but he kept his expression controlled, determined to keep the purpose of that conversation intact. Emma didn't say anything immediately, waiting for him to take the initiative, a different attitude from the confident and certain person he knew so well. After a few seconds of awkward silence, Ethan finally decided to break the ice, carefully choosing his words to avoid unnecessary emotional detours. "I'm not here to talk about what happened between us," Ethan began in a firm, neutral voice, ensuring that Emma clearly understood that he wasn't there for an attempt at reconciliation. "There's something more serious going on right now, something that involves you directly, even if you may not know it." Emma looked up slowly, surprised and apprehensive at the same time, as if she were bracing herself for another blow. Ethan took a deep breath before continuing, feeling that despite everything, he had a moral obligation to warn her of the real danger that was approaching. He reported in detail the conversation he had with Maya and the information about the ongoing investigations against her former boss, revealing that the evidence collected also indicated Emma's indirect participation in the fraudulent schemes, even if she was never aware of it. As he spoke, Ethan carefully observed her reactions, noticing how Emma's pale face became even more livid, overcome by fear and shock at the legal implications that could arise from this financial scandal. When he concluded, Emma had her hands shaking on the table, her breathing altered and irregular, unable to disguise the gravity of the situation she was facing. "I swear, Ethan, I had no idea," Emma finally managed to say, her voice breaking, clearly desperate for some understanding or mercy from him. Ethan shook his head slowly, indicating that he no longer needed to hear justifications or excuses. He believed her in that aspect, but that didn't change his decision about their past. Still, he knew he couldn't abandon her at that crucial moment, not because he forgave her, but because he knew it was the right thing to do when faced with such a difficult moral dilemma. "You need to see a lawyer immediately," Ethan advised, trying to be as objective as possible, even though it was difficult to maintain complete emotional distance in the face of such fragility. "There is evidence against you. You are being involved in something that could completely destroy the rest of your life. I don't want you to sink any further into this, no matter how bad what happened between us was." Emma looked at Ethan with tears in her eyes, surprised to still find a modicum of empathy in him after everything that had happened. "Why are you doing this?" she asked in a shaky whisper, her voice almost lost in the ambient noise of the cafe. Ethan sighed deeply, carefully analyzing the familiar face in front of him, reflecting on how unfair and unpredictable life could be. "Because I don't want my pain to turn me into someone like you were with me," he replied with brutal sincerity, knowing that his words hurt, but they were necessary. Emma lowered her eyes again, fully understanding the meaning of that sentence. Ethan continued, this time with a softer, more reflective tone, I'm not doing this out of love, nor for forgiveness, I'm doing it because, despite everything, I can't watch you completely destroy yourself without trying to stop it. Emma took a deep breath, discreetly wiping away her tears as she nodded slowly. She understood that there was no room for romantic hopes, but Ethan's attitude made her respect him even more, feeling deep regret for what she had lost. I don't know how to thank you. She began, but Ethan interrupted her with firm kindness, don't thank me. Do what needs to be done, protect yourself. And if you ever manage to rebuild yourself, do it for yourself, not for me. I've already made my decision. With these final words, Ethan stood up, leaving money on the table for coffee and walked slowly towards the exit, feeling a strange weight being partially lifted from his shoulders, as if this were the last stage of an emotional closure. Over the next few weeks, while Emma dealt with lawyers and complex court cases, Ethan focused on rediscovering his identity, slowly building a new routine in a small rented apartment far from his old home. He maintained frequent contact with Maya, whose friendship turned out to be deeper and more valuable than he had initially imagined, offering him the emotional support he needed to face the inevitable difficulties of that period. She became a safe haven, someone who listened to him without judgment and shared with him a more balanced view of life and relationships. Over time, Ethan realized that he was able to see a new perspective, where betrayal and suffering no longer determined his way of facing the future. He found in Maya a new type of trust, based on mutual honesty and emotional transparency. Still, Ethan was careful, wary of diving completely into a new relationship so soon after a traumatic experience. Maya understood this, demonstrating deep patience and understanding, something he valued enormously. But the past hadn't finished haunting him completely yet. Shortly afterwards, Ethan received an unexpected call from Emma, now with a surprisingly calm voice, although filled with something he couldn't clearly decipher. She said there was something important he needed to know, something that could completely change his perception of everything that had happened recently. Ethan felt his heart racing again, torn between refusing that contact and the almost irresistible need to know what she could still reveal after so many impactful events. After reflecting briefly, he decided to listen to her, more out of curiosity and to finally bury any remaining doubts. Emma revealed, in a firm and clear voice, that she had recently discovered, through her lawyers, that everything that had happened was not just chance, nor just the result of her wrong choices. There was someone manipulating that entire situation from the beginning, someone who deeply wanted to destroy it, but also reach Ethan, affecting him directly through it. A person who was close to him the entire time, silently observing everything, patiently waiting for the perfect opportunity to attack. Ethan was silent, absorbing the impact of this new information. His entire body froze when he heard the name revealed by Emma, immediately realizing that things were much more complex and dark than he could have ever imagined. At that moment, Ethan understood that the true enemy was still hiding in the shadows, and that the final battle that would define everything was just beginning. The name Emma revealed fell upon Ethan like a bolt of lightning, dispelling any trace of doubt that might still exist. Maya. The only person who had managed to get closer to him after the betrayal, the one who, with her apparent understanding and sympathy, had won his trust in a moment of deep vulnerability. Ethan felt his heart tighten in disbelief, trying to quickly process the extent of the manipulation that had been carried out against him. Maya had planned everything with frightening precision, subtly controlling every detail, from the beginning until that final moment. She was the true architect behind the suffering and losses he had recently faced. Emma provided detailed evidence obtained through recovered messages and recordings made by lawyers during the process. Maya had harbored a secret resentment against Ethan for years due to an old promotion he had won in her place, discreetly nurturing a deep and dangerous grudge. She watched Ethan build his happy, stable life alongside Emma, patiently waiting for the right moment to dismantle the life he had built piece by piece, while feigning unconditional support by her side. Ethan was stunned to realize how naive he had once again been, allowing himself to blindly trust someone who, under the guise of friendship, was preparing an attack as devastating as Emma's own betrayal. After absorbing the initial shock, Ethan made a brave and risky decision. He confronted Maya directly, arranging a seemingly casual meeting at her apartment, where he arrived seemingly calm and carefree, carefully hiding the emotions that were bubbling dangerously within him. Upon entering, he was greeted by Maya with a warm smile, which quickly faded when she noticed the seriousness with which Ethan was observing her, making it immediately clear that he knew everything. With cool calm, Ethan revealed the evidence he had obtained and questioned her directly, demanding real explanations about her motivations. Surprised, but without trying to deny the accusations, Maya slowly sat up, looking at Ethan with a calculating and imperturbable look, finally revealing without filters how much she resented the professional humiliation she had suffered years before. He coldly admitted that he manipulated Emma and the boss to destroy not only the marriage but also Ethan's career, expecting to see him in total despair and isolation, exactly as he had been up to that point. Maya showed no remorse, just the frightening coldness of someone who spent years dedicated to silent revenge. But Ethan, after everything he had experienced, didn't let that blow break him again. With surprising emotional control, she calmly informed that all this evidence would be immediately handed over to the police and the company's management, ensuring that she would never again be able to harm anyone in such a cruel way. Maya, finally realizing that her meticulously laid plan had failed, found herself trapped and defeated by her own obsession. At that moment, Ethan felt finally free from the burden he had carried for so long, seeing the true enemy face the definitive consequences of his evil actions. Meanwhile, Emma faced the development of events with deep regret, recognizing that she had been used and discarded as a piece in a game much bigger and more perverse than she had imagined. She then dedicated herself to rebuilding her life, completely distancing herself from the toxic environment she had been in and using that bitter experience to become a more honest person with herself. As the months went by, she managed to partially recover her professional image by engaging in social projects and supporting women who were victims of abusive relationships and emotional manipulations, transforming their pain into a greater purpose. The boss, in turn, faced the legal consequences of financial fraud, losing all the material goods he valued so much, as well as his social and professional prestige. Discredited, he ended up alone, living a modest and reclusive life, being forced to deeply rethink his choices and the true value of the things and people around him. His wife, responsible for exposing everything publicly, started a new life far away, using the courage she had acquired throughout that process to inspire other people to seek justice and dignity in similar situations. For Ethan, discovering the truth was painful but liberating. He understood that true learning was not just about betrayal and revenge, but about how to choose to react to life's adversities. With all that emotional turmoil overcome, he decided to move to another city, starting his life over from scratch in a place where no one knew his history, allowing himself to heal his emotional wounds without the constant pressure of past memories. Ethan slowly built a new identity based on transparency, self-knowledge, and a deeper understanding of what trust and true love meant. After a few years, in a chance meeting in a distant cafe, he met Emma again. The look between them was silent and filled with mutual recognition of the path taken since then. They exchanged few words, but enough for each person to know that the past was definitely buried and that they had finally found personal peace and the necessary maturity to move forward. Ethan found, years later, a new love. Someone with whom he built a relationship based on sincerity, respect and real understanding, never again allowing secrets or hidden resentments to undermine the trust and happiness he had fought so hard to regain. Emma moved on too, finding in social work a way to redeem herself and truly connect with people, transforming her pain into a powerful and meaningful mission. Maya, in turn, began to live a lonely and bitter reality, isolated by the consequences of her own destructive actions, belatedly understanding that her revenge only left her more empty and alone than ever, with no possible return to the life she had wasted trying to hurt others. And so, each character found their definitive destiny, showing that, in the end, no matter how powerful the betrayal or the pain caused by others, true strength lies in how each person chooses to move forward after the storm. Now, I want to know your opinion about this incredible story we just heard. Leave here in the comments what you think, how you would react if you were in the character's shoes, and take the opportunity to subscribe to the channel if you are not already subscribed. Also turn on notifications so you don't miss any exciting news stories like this. And remember, this channel never supports any type of betrayal. Our goal is to show, through these fictional narratives, how betrayal destroys lives and leaves scars that are difficult to heal. Thanks for listening, and until the next impactful story.